good. Good afternoon, everyone. We're a little bit before 6, but I get the feeling from even just the questions that have been asked of me right before the presentation that there might be a long Q&A session. So I think we might get this started. My name is Tom Chapman. Thank you for joining us for this program tonight. We're always happy to have the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library host these programs with us here in the Swanson room. Also want to say hello, and this is our squirrel. This is how we talk with the Facebook Live folks that we live stream this to. A byproduct of our COVID experience where everything went online and we still continue to have a following that follows us on Facebook all around the country. So thank you very much to our Facebook folks. As I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the program. So those of you who are here, keep your questions and think about them, and then you can try to stump the experts. And for those out on Facebook, you can add your comments or questions to the comment section. Before we get started, I want to give a heads up for some upcoming history walking tours. Phyllis Leffler, who is the Historical Society board president and also a scholar of local Jewish history, will be offering 2 options for her walking tours focused on Jewish history in downtown Charlottesville. There's a weekend tour on Sunday, April 27th at 1 p.m. and a after work tour on Wednesday, May 28th at 5 p.m. So you can go to our website, albemarlehistory.org, to find a link. We do all these through Eventbrite, so you can sign up for those. There'll be a limited number, so first come, first serve. You can also find out more information on our website about all of our different programs. We'll have a newsletter coming out soon, so if you're not a part of our email list, you can join us by either emailing info@albemarlehistory.org, or you can go to our website and sign up that way. And remember, history is only history if it is preserved and shared, and that's what we're here for. So if you're not a member of the Historical Society, I hope you'll consider joining. So as I said, I'm Tom Chapman with the Historical Society. As always, we're very appreciative to JMRL for sponsoring us. And tonight, we're fortunate to have the good folks from Rivanna Archaeological Services. Founded in 1999, Rivanna Archaeological Services is a local Charlottesville-based cultural resource management firm. They conduct professional archaeological and historical research and related cultural resource management services for a wide range of private and public clients throughout Virginia and across the United States. Tonight, they will be presenting their findings on the archaeological and historical investigations conducted at Swan Tavern, Charlottesville's first tavern. This was a joint City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County project to recover archaeological resources before the construction of the new county court building that you have seen in the city going up, kind of surrounding the old Levy Opera House on 3 sides in Court Square. So that's generally, and I imagine they'll have maps because they're archaeologists, so they'll show you where that is. A few brief introductions before we get started, and I'll relinquish the floor. I want to introduce Benjamin Ford. Benjamin Ford is the principal. Yes. Principal and owner of Rivanna Archaeological Services. Has over 30 years of experience as an archaeologist, historian, and landscape historian, and is passionate about the history of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and the Central Virginia region. I had Nick Von Harper on my list, I'll just point out, who is an integral part of what they do over there, and just wanted to have him recognized. I even learned how to pronounce Leicester. He attended the University of Leicester, so I had to look that one up to make sure I got it right. English translation. Susan Palazzo is an archaeologist at Rivanna Archaeological Services who manages artifact processing and specializes in faunal analysis. She received her PhD in anthropology from the University of Virginia in 2018. And Craig Kelly. He has been an archaeologist at Rivanna Archaeological Services for 3 years, but he's worked in the field since 2007 at sites such as Monticello, Highland, and the University of Virginia, as well as many other places up and down the mid-Atlantic coast. His specialties include 3D mapping of excavations and structures and the management of digital archaeological assets, and he knows how to set up a pointer to make the computer work, even more important. So with that, I want to thank you all again for coming, and then I will relinquish this to Ben and his colleagues so they can tell you some history. Thank you, Ben.
All right, get everything going here. Thank you, Tom. Thank you to the Historical Society and to the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. I'd like to talk very briefly about the format tonight. As Tom has implied, we're going to have a tag team presentation. I'll be talking about 20-25 minutes on the purpose of our research, the historical background for Swan Tavern, and a summary of some of the more important features we discovered at the site. Susan will take over from me, and she'll talk for about 15 minutes and probably has one of the more glamorous parts of this presentation, talking about the artifacts, the material culture. And then Craig will follow Susan and talk about the documentation process, and particularly the 3D documentation. Following that, I'll close, and then we will have a question and answer session. I know we are slated for an hour here, but I'd be happy to stay as long as possible informally to answer questions and talk to people. So, without further ado, as with most long and complicated projects, these archaeological investigations would not have been possible without the generosity and devoted support of numerous individuals, professional and avocational archaeologists, historians, preservationists, and dedicated volunteers who donated their time and their labor to help make this project a success. In addition to our dedicated staff in the front row and behind me, I did want to acknowledge several local and regional organizations, departments, entities that were instrumental in their support of this project and their support of Rivanna Archaeological Services. In particular, I'd like to thank the Albemarle County Facilities Planning and Construction Department, the City of Charlottesville Historic Preservation staff and Historic Resources Committee, very supportive of our work, the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society, the folks from Monticello Department of Archaeology. Are any of you here tonight, Monticello? All right, great. They helped out significantly both in the field and in our laboratory. Will Rourke and the UVA Scholars Lab were crucial in providing data that helped us develop 3D scans of the site and the features. The Archaeological Society of Virginia and its local volunteers. And then on the back end of this project, in terms of conservation of material culture, the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum in St. Leonard, Maryland. All right. Make sure we got this. Great. So if any of you have ever been downtown in the past year, as Tom mentioned, you may have noticed a very large construction project going on east of the Albemarle County Courthouse. And just to orient everyone, Swan Tavern Archaeological Site is located in downtown Charlottesville in the block between Park East High, East Jefferson, and 7th Street Northeast. It is currently being developed as a joint city-county courts complex. There are 3 historic structures that are present on the lot. The Redlands Club, where am I? Yeah, right here, number 1, and that's in the top photo up there in the upper left, which was constructed in the mid-1830s as a private residence. The Levy Opera House, number 2 here. Many of you are familiar with that, constructed as circa 1950s town hall for the city. And then a private residence, number 614 East High Street, built in the late 19th century. On our slide here, the red outlined area is the area that we investigated archaeologically. Essentially, all of the area that is covered in asphalt parking lot, or was covered in asphalt parking lot. And the blue shaded and blue highlighted structures were demolished. They were constructed in the 1980s, and as part of the development plan, were taken down. So why do we do archaeology? How did we get involved? Why were we out there? Well, for 2 very important reasons. Number 1, many of you who are familiar with the history of Charlottesville know that that general area was known as the site of the historic Swan Tavern, late 18th century tavern. As Tom mentioned, the first tavern established in the young city of Charlottesville. And then a second point, and perhaps one of the more important ones, there were 2 secondary sources which called out the possibility of the presence of burials somewhere on the site, human interments. So the 2 sources, first source, an 1824 newspaper article that urged citizens, quote, to erect a stone over his, and that being John Jouett's grave. And the second source, a much later publication taken from the recollections of James Alexander. According to the custom of that day, he was most probably, he being John Jouett, was most probably buried in the yard in the rear of his house, and his remains lie somewhere in the square on which the old town hall is situated. So because of those 2 reasons, because it was a very historic, important site, and because of the possibility of human remains on the site, we were contacted by Albemarle County and asked to develop a proposal that would, 1, locate any burials on the property, and 2, generally investigate the broader Swan Tavern site. So another 2 slides or so of broader historic context, both for Albemarle County and Charlottesville, and then for the Swan Tavern. In 1744, what historians have called Big Albemarle was established, and that included parts of what are now Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, Buckingham, Campbell, Rivanna, and Nelson counties. And it was cut off from Goochland County. And the first county court, many of you may know this, was actually established south of here near Scottsville on the James River. In 1761, that Big Albemarle County is divided, and the General Assembly a year later authorizes the move of the county court seat to a more central location. And that is the beginning of Charlottesville. William Taylor donated 1,000 acres to the trustees of Albemarle County, and a 50-acre parcel was set aside adjacent to and north of the formerly platted town. And a 2-acre public square was, a 2-acre public square was located north of the 50-acre town. And on that public square, a new frame courthouse was constructed. And as you can probably imagine, in the very late 18th century, 1770s, 80s, and 90s, Charlottesville was not a very big place, and very, very rustic. One of the few descriptions, primary source descriptions we have, comes from Thomas Ambury, a British prisoner of war. And in 1779, he described Charlottesville as this famous place, which we had heard so much of, consisted only of a courthouse, 1 tavern, and about a dozen houses, all of which were crowded with officers. And we believe the 1 tavern was more than likely the Swan Tavern. Whoops. There I go. That's the first one I said. So just to give you an idea of what the town looked like, The bottom 4 rows of lots here are the original 1762 town. The top 2 rows here are a 1790s addition. This is a early 19th century plat from a chancery cause, but it is important for our investigations because it shows, written out here, the location of the tavern house, which we know as the Swan Tavern. Here, the green shaded area is the 2-acre public square on which the first courthouse at Charlottesville was established. The tavern was located right next to it. And I'd like to call everyone's attention to this road. The road is historically known as the road to Moore's Ford, what we now know as Freebridge, or the Three Chopped Road. And the road is currently the western end of what is now East Jefferson Street. And it most likely connected with the course of East High Street, going down straight towards Freebridge. So more on the Swan Tavern. It's important to remember that in the late 18th and early 19th century, a tavern was a place, of course, that served meals, drinks, provided limited beds to visitors and residents alike, but it was also the residence for the tavern keeper and his family. Many taverns had joint complexes where the tavern keeper and his family would live there along with the guests. And so John Jouett established Swan Tavern. He arrived in Charlottesville in 1773 and purchased 100 acres surrounding Charlottesville. Prior to coming to Charlottesville, though, he was a tavern owner and tavern keeper in Louisa County, in, I believe it's pronounced Cuckoo, I don't know. Cuckoo, thank you. And resided there. And John Jouett's father, also Matthew Jouett, owned and operated a tavern called Hill's Ordinary. So extending back into the mid and possibly first half of the 18th century, the Jouett family had a long history of owning and operating taverns. So Jouett comes to Charlottesville 1773, and we don't have a precise date for the establishment of the tavern when it was built and opened up, but we do know, thanks to Thomas Jefferson, who took meticulous notes, that in the late 1770s it was operating as a tavern. And Jefferson, in his memoranda, notes that he visited the Swan Tavern, paying for dinner, for hot toddies, and for entertainment, and providing a horseler or someone who managed the stables a fee as well. One of the more important events which happened at Swan Tavern in 1781, those of you who know your local history and your Virginia history, the General Assembly fled Richmond in advance of the British invasion and came to Charlottesville. And we know that the May session of 1781 was held inside Swan Tavern. We know that for a fact because a few years later, John Jouett petitions the General Assembly for compensation for alterations made to his tavern. And the tavern, according to John, suffered damage. And he lists very generally some of the alterations that were made. Pulling down the partition, cutting the doors to fit for the use of the delegates in the May session. So a very important event happened there. Let's see if I can get it. Continuing, and this is the last of the history slides, in the early 1800s, 1805, John Jouett and his wife, Morning Jouett, both die. And the tavern passes to their estate, and the tavern is leased for a period of 7 or 8 years and then sold in 1813. So it passes out of the Jouett family in 1813, and a series of tenants and owners occupy the tavern until about the early 1830s. And by 1832, 1833 is the first evidence we have that the tavern is down. Some references call it a fire that demolished the tavern. Other references recall a dilapidated structure. Either way, pretty good evidence in 1833 for the sale of the Swan Tavern lot, the same one on which was situated the old Swan Tavern, past tense in this advertisement. The Swan Tavern is an important resource because it tells us about the lives of enslaved African Americans, the laborers who lived and worked there. We have primary source records that tell us the names, in many cases, and the numbers of enslaved individuals who were owned by the Jouetts and subsequent owners of the property, many of whom likely worked and lived at Swan Tavern. We know, for example, depending upon which primary source you look at, whether it's the U.S. Census, county tax records, or itemization of his estate at his death, that the Jouetts owned anywhere between 11 and about 20 individuals over the course of that period. Archaeologically speaking, material culture, the bits and pieces of artifacts, ceramics, glass, etc., personal items that we recover from the site also have the ability to speak to both free and enslaved African Americans who lived and worked on the property. And I just want to point out one individual whom we were able to identify had a very compelling life story, and I just want to outline it here. An individual named Adam Laws was originally an enslaved person owned by John Jouett. I believe he was his manservant, and he was emancipated in John Jouett's will 10 years after the death. So by 1815, Adam Laws is a free man. He then went on to purchase a 1-acre parcel in town, down by our office on Water Street, and built his own residence there. He subsequently married a free black woman named Elizabeth or Betsy Barnett, and they together had a daughter named Maria. For whatever reason, Adam Laws moved to Georgetown in the 18-teens. We don't know specifically what year, but he shows up in census records in Georgetown in 1820, and he married another woman named Ann Laws. Adam Laws ended up dying sometime in the early 1820s. We think he may have sought work outside of Georgetown, possibly in the railroads in West Virginia, but that's a story that we are still trying to track down. So fascinating life biography, going from an enslaved individual owned by the Jouetts, living and working at Swan Tavern, and then to Georgetown as a free person. Not enough hands here. So what do we know about the Swan Tavern? We know quite a bit from just a few, very few documents. Some of the most compelling information comes from fire insurance policies. On the slide here, we see a policy from the Mutual Assurance Society, which was established in the late 18th century, and it insured both urban and rural properties from fire. And we're fortunate to have 3 different policies over the course of the early 19th century, one from 1816, one from 1823, and another from 1827 that insure buildings on the Swan Tavern property. And these policies generally had sketch maps. Keeping in mind this is just a sketch, it's not to scale, but it does have very important information and just as importantly, locations, size, scale of structures. One of the more, I'll just read the insurance policy here. The tavern and dwelling is this structure right here. It was insured for $5,500, and it was described as 2-story wood, 20 by 90 feet, so a very long structure. A kitchen adjacent to it, smaller 1-story frame, 16 by 20, and a stable, very long structure, 20 by 60 feet, also 1-story frame, and then a small smokehouse, not described at all, but insured for $40. One of the more interesting details that these insurance policies provide us, and one that we did not expect, was that the tavern, Swan Tavern, faced what is now East Jefferson Street. This is Park Street up here. The courthouse is further left, off to the side there, and it faced East Jefferson Street. I think I went in there, and maybe many of us had the assumption that it would face the courthouse, a very important public building in Charlottesville, but it did not. It faced East Jefferson Street. And when you think about it, that made a lot of business sense. People are coming into town, coming west from Richmond and points between Richmond and Charlottesville, and this is the primary road into town, and you arrive at the courthouse. So really important detail that surprised us. And I have to thank my colleague Jeff Werner here, a historic preservation planner for the city of Charlottesville. These drawings and images were done by Jeff, and they're schematic drawings. And they're designed to give you an idea of what the Swan Tavern may have looked like. Keep in mind they are based solely on the dimensions and materials mentioned in the insurance policy, so they're our best guess as to what it may have looked like. The top left and right images show a story-and-a-half structure with dormers. The bottom left and right images show a full two-story structure. And we have done a good bit of preliminary research trying to look at other extant taverns from the 18th century, which might give us an idea. And there are many, many that are very long and narrow and have front porches like the Swan Tavern did. So archaeological methods, keeping in mind that these investigations, the primary goal was to determine the presence or absence of human burials, we conducted 3 separate phases of archaeological work. Phase 1, we call it, was excavating systematic shovel tests across the project area once the asphalt was removed. And shovel test pits are about 1.5-foot diameter holes placed at 25, 50-foot intervals. And the idea is the design of the phase 1 shovel testing is to identify material culture and to document soil development. The second phase, up here pictured in the upper left, was machine-assisted removal of topsoil. And this is especially useful in identifying and defining what we call subsurface features that are actually dug down into our red Albemarle clay. When you remove the topsoil from an area and come down on that red clay, anything that's dug down into the soil, whether it's a tree planting hole, a utility line, or a grave shaft, is going to be visible in the sense that it's going to be a subtly different color and texture than the surrounding red clay. So it's a very accurate way of determining whether there are any features in the ground. And then the third method was actually excavating a sample of our subsurface features. And I stress the word sample. This is a project area map that Nick produced. We found a total of 380 cultural features, post holes, pits, utility lines, you name it, we found it, that were visible in that red Albemarle clay once we removed the asphalt and the topsoil. And Susan will talk about this in a little bit. We also recovered over 32,000 artifacts. But most importantly, we did not identify any grave shafts in the area that we were investigating. So just some important cultural features that we identified during the archaeological investigations. I have 3 or 4 slides, and then I'll pass it on to Susan. One of the more interesting cultural features in the upper left-hand photo here is a remnant brick foundation And this structure, if we look at Sanborn maps and do our research, here's the Levy Opera House, the Redlands Club. We knew that historic maps told us there was a structure in this location, but we had no idea that there would be extant brick remains below grade. And this is, in fact, the remains or a portion of the house of 610 East High Street, late 19th century residence. Another important and very interesting feature that we were able to identify was a brick and stone lined well. We were fortunate to identify it because it's the only very deep feature on the property. And although it was disturbed at its surface, you can see we have some bricks that are in fairly good shape, but a portion of it appears to have been disturbed, possibly during the construction of the asphalt parking lot. But once you get below that surface, it was very well preserved and had very good integrity. Primary sources note the presence of a well on the Swan Tavern property in the 1780s. That's the earliest date we have that mentions and locates a well. We don't know if it was this well, but it's probably a good candidate. And the well was filled with what we call fill soil, and we were able to partly excavate the well. You'll see photographs here of excavation in progress. And the reason we didn't fully excavate it is that it is an expensive and time-consuming process, particularly if the well goes down 50, 70, 80 feet. There's also a major safety issue in shoring up the sides. So we decided to excavate that feature partially. Perhaps the most interesting feature on the property is what we call our midden feature. For those of you who don't know archaeology speak, a midden is essentially a shallowly dug concentration of trash, artifacts that people would have used and thrown out for various reasons. In this case, it was a bowl-shaped feature. You can see part of the bowl shape here and the dark shaded soil in this photo here directly underneath the brick remains of the 610 East Market Street structure, East High Street, excuse me. And this midden was filled with tavern-related domestic trash. Susan will get into this, but lots of ceramics, glass, architectural items, personal items, animal bone, etc. And the date of nearly all of the material culture recovered from this midden feature reflects a transitional late 18th to first quarter of the 19th century, a use that corresponds very, very nicely with the establishment and operation of Swan Tavern from the early 1770s to about the 1830s. Lastly, we have several features which we believe may be associated with the tavern itself. As I mentioned, the tavern faced and was located on East Jefferson Street. East Jefferson in this little map insert is right here. And the area that we are looking at is that pink shaded area. There are 4 green shaded features here, at least 4, that we believe may be associated with the tavern. Some of these features, and here's just a very good picture of what a subsurface feature looks like. It is distinctly different in soil color and texture from the surrounding red clay. But we believe that several of these may either be post holes, large post holes, or pits. This one in particular, we believe, is a subfloor pit, which may have been placed within the tavern itself or one of its northern wings. And I'm going to pass the microphone on to Susan.
So I'm here to talk to you about all the cool stuff that we found at the tavern, and as you may guess from what Ben said about the findings, I had a really hard time kind of narrowing everything down so that I could, I tried to show you some of my favorite things. We had just piles and piles of artifacts. Like he said, over 32,000 artifacts. I did some math, and it was almost 550 pounds of artifacts. So these were washed, they were bagged, and they were cataloged in DAX, which is a database that is housed in Monticello called the Digital Archaeological Archive for Comparative Slavery. And here's just kind of a summary of what we found. You can see that most of it was ceramics and faunal remains, meaning animal remains, bones, shells, that kind of thing. The cool thing about this site was just the significant amount of the finds. And almost half of that came from the midden feature that Ben was talking about. And a lot of these were also large pieces of material, which is unusual. We're used to dealing with teeny tiny bits of ceramics and things like that. So that was very exciting. And a lot of it was very early material too. A lot of 18th century material, which is new to me, mostly working at UVA and other 19th century sites. Oops, there we go. All right, so some of the things we found were architectural remains. Of course, we expected that. We knew there were buildings there. Most of these were frame buildings from the tavern period. We have, of course, things like brick and mortar. Here's one of our bricks. You might notice it's a strange shape. It's not rectangular, so this is what we call a column brick. And this one was interesting because it would have been used at a building, like the library that had substantial brick columns. But as we know, the tavern was a frame tavern. The early courthouse was a frame building. So it is kind of a mystery where this came from. There were over 20 of these, and UVA seems to be the only answer. One of the only construction projects that would have been ongoing with monumental architecture like that. Of course, we also have nails. Most of them looked like that. They were not very pretty. They were corroded and hard to identify. We have this nice ceramic doorknob, other door hardware, this hinge that we have an x-ray of. So I have a few more photos like that where we took artifacts up to the Mac Lab in Maryland and were able to do some x-rays and also conservation of some of our metal artifacts. And most of what we found were ceramics. So over 11,000 of the artifacts were ceramics. Almost half of those came from the Midden on High Street. And as I mentioned, a lot of these items were produced quite early, so they could have been even brought over with people from Europe, or they would have at least been using similar items. So these are some stonewares that we found. Up here is what we call Westerwald. This is a German stoneware, very high quality, very highly decorated. We also have white salt glaze, which was a much cheaper option. It was British. It was very durable, very common in the 18th century. Came in a lot of different molded decorations. And then a version of that called debased scratch blue is a decorated version of that white salt glaze. And this is part of a chamber pot here. So you'll notice that some of these pieces say GR, and we have crowns as well. So that would have stood for George Rex, referring to one of three King Georges between the 18th century into the early 19th century. more stoneware. This was really fun to put back together. So this was a British Brown or Fulham stoneware vessel, quite large, and we actually spent time gluing it back together over several weeks. And then we also have this piece of black basalt, which was made by Wedgwood, and we think this one would have been a sugar bowl or something like that, but again, we spent time gluing it back together and very painstakingly. Another really interesting find that I haven't seen a lot of in my short time with RAS, but this is called colonoware. So we found two pieces of it. It is a coarse earthenware. So we have one piece here, just two different sides of the same piece. That is a rim sherd, and then this smaller sherd. This piece came from the well, and this piece came from one of the what we think might be a barrel privy on the site. So, and these are some examples of what the objects that they came from might have looked like, the vessels. So this is a locally made ceramic produced by enslaved African Americans that resembles both Native American and African American ceramics, but also has European traditions incorporated, such as vessel shapes, things like that. It would have been a low-fired coil or slab-built ceramic, unglazed, using local clays, and varies a lot in color and shape regionally. And yeah, so it was pretty cool to find this. And Monticello has actually recently gotten a good amount of money to do further studies on these types of ceramics and who might have made them and used them. We also have some glazed coarse earthenwares. We found a lot of these. They varied a lot in color and design, and these are not easily dated, which was a bummer, but they were locally produced in small production all over the place in this region, and would have been fairly fragile, replaced frequently. And this one was cool because not only is it glazed on the inside and not on the outside, but it has this incised decoration on it. And it's probably hard to see here, but there's actually a fingerprint on the outside of it. And it's always cool when we find that. You can actually see the last person who, the person who made it and touched it, and we see that on ceramics and bricks sometimes. So we also found a good amount of porcelain. This is Chinese porcelain that was made specifically for export to European markets. It's usually hand-painted, both overglaze and underglaze, and it becomes more common with increasing popularity of tea drinking, and becomes more affordable as time goes on. There were, of course, other types of porcelains that we found, but this is one of the earliest ones. And it's interesting because it took European potters quite a while to figure out how to make porcelain like this. So this, for a long time, was relied on. And once they did finally learn how to make European hard paste and bone china, then they were able to compete with these imports. So we also have refined earthenwares. Here's an example of Delft. So as the name suggests, it comes from the Netherlands, but also is made in England. It was a tin-glazed earthenware, quite fragile. We actually found a lot of it where the glaze had just separated from the body of the earthenware, and the glaze seemed more durable than, than the actual earthenware in some cases. So we also have refined earthenwares. Here's an example of Delft. So as the name suggests, it comes from the Netherlands, but also is made in England. It was a tin-glazed earthenware, quite fragile. We actually found a lot of it where the glaze had just separated from the body of the earthenware, and the glaze seemed more durable than the actual earthenware in some cases. We found this one that has text on it. We are not sure what it says or even what language it might be in, if it is English or Dutch. So the refined earthenware we found most commonly, is called creamware, and you can see that's because of its color. It's either, yellow or a light cream color. A lot of creamware is undecorated. We do have a few pieces here that are hand painted, some with printing on them or text, some edge decoration, feather edge, and shell edge decoration. This kind of little fragment of a leaf that would have been like a molded leaf plate of some kind. And it also had some decorated wares that get lumped with creamer often. This very cool bright green called Wedgwood green bowl that we found, as well as these tortoise shells and clouded Wielden wares. Again, quite early. I mean, these are all 18th century ceramics that may have been brought from earlier taverns to this tavern even. So unlike creamware, we have pearlware, which is highly decorated, and it was very exciting to find and wash all of these pieces. These are imitating the Chinese imported porcelains, so you get a lot of kind of repeats of those motifs in the pearlware, and we also have colored shell edge. Some of them look like, this kind of looks like a cabbage. This plate was really cool because we had almost the entire plate. It took a long time to put that together and sort it out from all the other green shell edge, but that was really, really cool, really rewarding. Oh, there you go. And then we also have what we call polychrome designs, so more hand painting on pearlware, just with a huge variation in design. It was really astounding. Even some of the archaeologists from Monticello who had seen a lot of this were just amazed at how many patterns we had that they had not seen yet. So that was very cool. We have this nice saucer, again, that's almost complete, with little flower designs on it. We also have some factory-made slip, which would have been turned on a lathe and incised and colored. And then less of it, but we also had what we call transfer print, which was a later decorative technique, although still 19th century, but did not find quite as much of that. And I'm just showing you ceramics that are mostly from the 18th and early 19th centuries, but we did find ceramics all the way up to the early 20th century. Just not a lot of them, and they did not tend to be in the excavated features. They came from clearing the topsoil in most cases. And now some glass. So we found over 3,000 pieces of glass total. Most of those were items that were made before machine-made glass became common in 1905. So we have a lot of free-blown and mold-blown glass. These are wine bottles, the tops of wine bottles. We found a ton of those. A lot of them in that midden. Again, tavern, there's a lot of drinking going on. So that was pretty expected. We also found these really beautiful fragments of etched glass, and we think that they were probably something like this, which is called a flip cup. And flip was a popular drink in the 18th century, so it was made of beer, liquor, spices, raw egg, and then you would stick a hot poker in it and mix it together. We're gonna try it sometime and see how it goes. So this would have been a design that was produced in the mid to late 18th century in Pennsylvania. So if that is what we seem to have pieces of, then that again fits quite well with our timeline. We also had several pieces of stemware. Again, some of these with early characteristics. So this is part of a base, what's called a folded foot, and then you have a stem that has this white swirl through it. These are, again, mid to late 18th century characteristics, which is pretty cool. And we were also able to put some of the pieces back together. Okay, so a few words about the bones. We found over 10,000 pieces of bone and shell and other animal remains. Again, that is about a third of the total artifacts we found, so quite a lot. They were highly fragmented, so the number that I was able to identify was very small, like 10% of that was actually identifiable. Most of it was mammal bone. So we have there we go. We have part of a pig mandible up here. These are all cow teeth. This is a cow horn core. So this is the horn part attached to the skull. Some of these were butchered. So these are sawn pieces of likely cow bone. And let's see. We also found bird. A lot of them tend to be chicken size. We found also over 200 pieces of bird eggshell and other small things as well, like fish scale. So here's a scale from a rockfish. And we actually took several soil samples from certain features where we were encountering remains like this and processed them using water to be able to pick out the tiny artifacts in there. So another thing that is very tiny, this is a grape pip or grape seed that was carbonized that we actually found in one of the shovel test pits. So that wasn't even floated, that was just picked out by hand. But that was really cool to see that. And then several oyster shells, like hundreds of oyster shells, a lot of them coming from the midden, so probably used as a food source at the tavern. Okay, some of the coolest things we found were what we call small finds or personal items. Things that people would have carried with them or had on their clothing. A lot of buttons, all different materials, any material you name, we found it. Copper alloy, iron. We had a piece here with glass inset in it. This is also a glass button with etched flower designs on it. Ceramic buttons, rubber buttons, bone buttons. Just hundreds of those, so that was very, very cool. We also found 166 straight pins, and all of the ones in this picture are handmade, so pre-1820s. That was pretty cool. We also have some fasteners, so hook and eye fasteners. This is a corset fastener. Would have been pre-1848. We also have beads. These are all of our beads that we found. They were all glass. One of them is faceted. We also found several buckles. So this is a shoe buckle, and this is a stock buckle. So in the 18th century, when men wore these neck scarves, you'd have a buckle in the back, so that's where that one came from. Also toys, so we found clay and glass marbles, also a porcelain doll arm, among other doll parts, but that was the best one. This is a purse or wallet clasp. We have some slate pencils here that would have been used by children who were learning how to write on slate tablets. This is a 1904 penny, so one of our later finds, but still made it on here. We have a nice thimble. This up here is a bone toothbrush. They became popular in the 1860s, 1870s, when people started to pay attention to toothbrushing a little bit more. A couple of things we got x-rayed. So here we have a folding knife and then a pair of scissors. Yeah, they just look like lumps of iron, and then you get them x-rayed. It's amazing, really amazing. What are we doing here? Okay, and also a few weapons. So in the midden, we found this fragment of a bayonet. It was likely from the Revolutionary War period. We also found some bullets, mostly lead shot, and some gun flints. And then last but not least, the pipes. So you may have seen these white Cowlin pipes before with the very long stems. We found over 200 fragments of pipes. These would have been used from the late 16th century through the 19th century. They were fragile, they broke easily, but they were also cheap to replace. And most of ours are plain, but some of them are decorated like these here. And then we also had a couple earthenware pipes, and these became kind of like our mascots for the site. They have little faces on them, noses and ears, and this kind of headdress on the side, or wreath. And we actually found that these are very similar to pipes that were produced in North Carolina by German immigrants in the 1750s through 1770s. And here is a drawing of one of those. And then we also have part of a steatite pipe, or a soapstone pipe. And that would have been locally made. It has a carved band around the top. And these are frequently associated with Native American or African American manufacture. So a lot of the contexts that these have been found in Charlottesville and in Albemarle County are associated with free and enslaved African Americans. So they've been found at Monticello, they've been found at UVA, at the Piedmont Plantation down Fontaine, at the Foster site near UVA, or currently on UVA property, and we even found one recently at Birdwood at the plantation there. So they're very, very cool. And I'm now going to turn you over to Craig, and he's going to show you some models of these pipes, which is really neat, and talk about how we preserve these artifacts and the site.
See if I can manage all three things here. All right. Stay there, please. There we go. All right. One of the very first lessons instilled upon me as a young archaeologist was that everything, especially in archaeology, is impermanent. Every shovel cut or trowel scrape removes sediment from where it was originally deposited, and you will be the only person to experience that patch of ground as it was when you first found it. Exposed soil will bake out in the sun and dry it out, and inevitably there will be a point where you must walk away because your access to the site is at an end. At the Swan Tavern site, we split our crew between two main roles. One of us would be with the backhoe as it removed and disturbed sediment for the defunct parking lot, monitoring the work and flagging any potential features. The rest of the crew followed behind the excavation, going to each flag spot and investigating further. Every soil stain, we deemed to be a feature was given an official number, measured, described, and photographed. And the last step in the documentation process was the recording of the location of each feature with GPS equipment. With those coordinates, we were able to make the map that Nick was able to produce over there. We washed and recovered the artifacts and recorded all the different attributes that Susan was talking about, weight and form, and they all went into DAX so that they could be searched. And those records are incredibly important and the backbone of the research that we did, but they are secondary records. They are data created by us, the archaeologists, based on our observations of the site. There were many points along our dig where we had to decide what was a feature and what wasn't, what attributes to record and what to leave out. And we took our time in on site and we distilled it down into written descriptions and photographs and tables. And however, studying our records is a far cry from being able to visit and experience the site in person. What I want to talk to you about this evening is trying to get as close to that experience as possible by creating 3D models of sites, features, and eventually artifacts. The first form of modeling that we had access to at Swan Tavern is called LiDAR scanning. We had the opportunity to have Will Rourke back there, the 3D data and content specialist over at UVA Scholar Lab, come and scan the entirety of the cleared site along with many of the features that we had opened and already excavated. From his scans, Mr. Rourke produced a three-dimensional model of our site with greater precision and speed than any hand drawings would have ever captured. The scanner that Mr. Rourke used at the Tavern site was a ferrofocus terrestrial LiDAR scanner. And that scanner works by rapidly pulsing a laser beam, and it reflects off of nearby surfaces while changing the direction and angle between each pulse. It measures the changes in that beam as it returns to the machine to see where those points are in space. And then it will record that data as where it is, how high up, how far left and right, and how far away, what color the surface that the laser reflected off of, and lastly, how bright that surface was. The scanner can record objects up to 2 to 3 millimeter resolution at 25 feet, and it can go much further than that, but at that distance, the resolution decreases as the reflections become increasingly further away from the scanner. This is just a sample. This isn't the Swan Tavern, but I had this in my files. When all the data points from the scans are added together, they form a point cloud. And this is a virtual model containing millions of measured points that come together to construct and represent a real space, which is much easier to see than to explain. Let's see. Oh, yeah. The scanner records what is in its direct line of sight, so it has to be able to see everything. And that means that everything, any standing object, including the machine itself, will create a shadow or a blind spot. These shadows appear as blank spaces in the point cloud and show where no points have been recorded. The scans have to be taken from multiple locations around an area to eliminate the shadows from one place to another. After Mr. Work was finished, the scans get processed together into a piece of software that binds them all together in one complete model. This is the slide I thought it was going to. So this is a model. This model is a record of a site that no longer exists, much like our field records and GPS data. However, those records are our personal observations. They're information that were reflected through the lens of our personal training and experience. While we had a system in place to make sure that our process of recording features was consistent, any future research that would depend on what we wrote down, our specific information, is dependent on what we thought to record and what we will hamper by what we may have left out. While the site up the street has been irrevocably changed, we can still travel to this accurate representation and still experience a version of the site and still continue to do research. One of the scan's major benefits was thoroughly documenting the well in the south lot. Traditionally, an important feature of the size and magnitude would have been drawn in the field, first by setting up some precise points that were controlled for, and then slowly measuring distances to each corner of each stone and brick, and then putting it all onto graph paper. This would have had to been done at set scale, and then probably would have taken 2 people at least a day, I'm going to say, to make sure that you're accurately capturing the shape and the feature as well as its components. Instead, once we were done and didn't have access to the site anymore, I took a segment of Mr. Rourke's data and added some false color, which comes to this psychedelic-looking image here. But here, what I've done is replaced the real color that the scanner picked up and changed it so that I was using color that corresponded to its height and elevation. And that draws your attention to these different places where elevations have changed. And then with Nick's help and GPS data, I was able to put that into our map and then trace each of those features digitally on a computer rather than taking up valuable time on the site. I've talked about the strengths of recording a site with LiDAR and its accuracy, its ability to capture a large area, and how the record it creates can be explored just as if you were still standing on site. However, the technology and the resulting 3D models have their shortcomings. The equipment and software needed to record the site and create the models are expensive and require familiarity with both the equipment and the software. It can take several hours to an entire day to capture a space, even though the captured space is ultimately quite large. The scanner can only scan what it's able to see and requires you to do overlapping collections to make sure that models can capture as much as you can. It has trouble with things like dips in the terrain or uneven surfaces that can be harder to map. And of course, archaeology is all about putting dips in the terrain. The point clouds that are created from the scans, while they're incredibly detailed, they're still constructed of dots, colored dots, of differing densities depending on how much you can overlap in any kind of particular scan. Lastly, the data, for better or worse, is a capture of the site as it was on a specific day. The day that Mr. Rourke scanned the Swan Tavern site was an exceptionally sunny day, resulting in some very bright surfaces and very intense shadows, and you can't shade an entire city block. This only affects the visual experience of the model, so like if I wanted to go in and do measurements, I can still do that by turning off sort of that color and see the shapes of features and the different buildings there. But finding things that were unexcavated, where we're dealing with color and texture, can be then difficult. On August 27th of that year, in 2023, we were notified that the excavation for the construction had started near the well on the Swan Tavern site, and that we would have a short window to be able to document the well again, this time about 5 feet down from where ground surface was when we had first excavated it. This time, our access to the site would be measured in hours, and that meant being as efficient as possible. And for that job, we turned to another method of 3D modeling, and that's photogrammetry. You can do it. Nope, too far. Bury the lead. Stop. There we go. Photogrammetry is a modeling process where an area or environment is photographed from many different angles, and the resulting photos are fed into a computer program. The program takes a look at each photo and compares them to one another, looking for similar shapes, colors, and patterns. And then you can manually mark in multiple photos and say, this is the same point. This is something that you can stitch together. And tell it how far apart some of these points are so that the resulting model can actually be done to scale. So the result from photogrammetry is a starkly different model from the cloud that was generated by Will's LiDAR scanners. So this is the well. Let's see. Hopefully I don't make anybody sick. So firstly, this is a mesh. This is actually a solid piece of, well, a virtual piece of ground that is constructed from thousands or millions of triangles. And onto that shape, the computer then will make a texture that's built from all of the photographs that you use to make that shape. It really results in something that's incredibly lifelike to the original environment. It's something that you, almost like you were standing right there. Like LiDAR scanning, modeling with photogrammetry has its own strengths and weaknesses. The equipment to start making models for this is relatively modest. We did this with our field camera and computer that we had in the lab. It has to have a dedicated video card, but we already were planning for that. There are multiple software options to be able to do this kind of work, some of which are free or very low cost. The final product, of course, again, is more photorealistic compared to the things that you would get out of the LiDAR scanning directly. And once the model is created, you can start to play with the photographs that you use to change the texture to try to get rid of some of those harsh lights and shadows that might be in your data if you have to do this on a sunny day. Taking photographs of an area can be relatively quick. How many areas it might take half an hour or less depending on the size of the area that you want to model. And lastly, because each component of a site can be modeled separately, you can combine models together to create a virtual version of a site that never existed. And what I mean by that is that archaeology, if you're digging some of these places, we could superimpose this right on top of the well site that was 5 feet above ground and be able to see how those two relate to one another because that's spatial data that can connect them together. You can do it. There it goes. On the flip side, the quality of the finished photogrammetry model is entirely dependent on how good of a photographer you are. If you don't take enough photos or you don't take very good photos, you're going to end up with a bad model. You need to make sure that you have consistent lighting and overlap when you're doing this so that when the computer tries to stitch everything together, that it can build you a nice model like this. The quality of the final product also depends on the quality of the camera. So if you want to use a phone camera to do this, you absolutely can, but it's not going to look as good as a DSLR or a modern mirrorless camera will. It's much harder to cover a larger space, like Will was able to get the entire city lot into a LiDAR scan. Doing something like that with photogrammetry is possible, but we're talking about having to get a drone and flying over, and that might take much more an order of a day or several days, and making it out of different models rather than just one. So let's see. Oh, the last thing is that it has trouble with smooth, reflective, or relatively featureless surfaces, which will come up in a moment. The photogrammetry process, it relies on being able to find patterns in your photographs, and if you are reflecting like a black reflective surface, it will have a very hard time trying to find a pattern in a black reflective surface. So after working at the Swan Tavern site and seeing what kind of capabilities the 3D modeling could bring to our toolkit, we began to integrate this into our site documentation elsewhere. Then in January of this year, we circled back to the Swan Tavern assemblage to try something new. Could we use this technology, the same equipment, to make models of some of the artifacts that had been found in the Midden? And we were not the first people to try to do this, of course. Different institutions and museums have been creating models of their objects and using that same process for several years now. The difference was that the photogrammetry software that we have access to is called reality capture, and it is designed for larger scale stuff. It's for flying a drone or taking pictures of a well. So we thought we would give it a shot. So we also didn't have a photography studio, so we built our own using field lights, stools, paper towels, a bed sheet, polarizing filters, and painter's tape. And normally when mapping objects of this size with photogrammetry, items are put onto a turntable, and then the camera is kept stationary, and you slowly rotate the object to make sure that you're taking photos from precise angles. But reality capture really doesn't like that because you are just sort of warping the entire world in its eyes. So to trick our software into doing what I wanted it to do, the artifacts were placed on an elevated mount, and then the camera was on a tripod, and I slowly crawled around the room taking pictures with the camera on long exposures from this tripod, starting below the artifacts and then just sort of going in circles and taking successively higher shots at each pass. It took a few passes, but it actually turned out pretty good. So what started as a proof of concept exercise and as much an academic endeavor turned into 2 models of these rare and important artifacts from the Swan Tavern. These models are also to scale. And so anyone who's looking to study the motifs or measure individual elements are going to be able to get accurate data. And because they're digital files, I can email you this, which is just fascinating to me. And the world of 3D modeling, when we stepped into it from our work at Swan Tavern, it's presented us with a lot of exciting possibilities. These 3D models allow us to both expedite our work by saying, I will deal with that on a computer screen in the lab when I can no longer stand here, but also capture things way more complex than I might even be able to do by hand, certainly by myself. It also allows you to have in a pocket a copy of the space when you no longer have access to it. There are many times, thank you, Will, again, that I was like, oh, we didn't measure that. And then I walked virtually to that place on the lot and then was able to do a precise measurement of how deep this hole was or whether these features were in alignment with one another or not. It's just an incredibly useful tool. Lastly, these 3D models, they're just exponentially better for anybody to be able to start to visualize and interpret a space. That's how we've evolved, right? If I put you in a room and you're going to look around the room and you might look under your chair to see what's there, you're not going to be, if I was to put you in front of all of the records that we had created from the Swan Tavern site that were just on a computer, you might not really know intuitively how to go and do your research, right? And other places, again, we're not on the forefront of this, but I'm trying to be. Different places like museums and institutions are starting to use this technology so that you can visit exhibits and landmarks all over the world, but of course you can do it from here. You can get that kind of experience. And of course, because it's digital, you can also sort of augment that experience. I love these exhibits at the Field Museum because you can walk through this space as if you were wandering the museum, as if you were there, but of course then you can click on the signs. You can say, oh, I want to learn more from these particular signs, and you get that experience. And it's all being built with that technology. But of course, these are not archaeology sites. These sites are, today, visitable. So it would be really neat to be able to start to continue to use this technology for things like the Swan Tavern, which is not there anymore, but be able to put goggles on somebody's head and then just let you walk around. So. I'm going to give you back to Ben here.
So I promise you one more minute of comments, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. I know we've run over a bit, but I thought it was important to conclude with reiteration of how important the Swan Tavern site is. As Craig has mentioned, archaeology is essentially a destructive process. You dig something and it's no longer there. So it's important to document what was accomplished and what was found. And as part of the archaeological process, we issue a report of findings. And for Swan Tavern, it was about that thick for the report and twice as thick for our catalog of artifacts. But that report documents the archaeological findings and makes the argument for the significance of the Swan Tavern property. And based on our archival and our archaeological research, we do believe that the Swan Tavern is a significant property for the following reasons. We believe it's significant because it is a rare, well-preserved archaeological site in a developed urban context. As you can imagine, you don't find many archaeology sites in urban contexts that have been built on and developed for 200 years, but Swan Tavern is the exception. It is significant because we know about it, and what we know about it contributes to a greater understanding of the history and development of early Charlottesville and early Albemarle County, as well as the beginnings of Court Square. It is significant because, of course, Swan Tavern was the site of the May 1781 General Assembly session, fleeing from Richmond. It is very significant because it tells the story of enslaved African Americans that lived and labored on the property. It is significant because it is represented, as Craig and Susan have shown us, by numerous well-preserved archaeological features with excellent integrity. And it is significant because it is represented by a large, extensively large, mid-18th to mid-20th century material culture collection. And because of these facts, we believe the Swan Tavern archaeological site is potentially eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. That has yet to be done, but we believe it would qualify as a nationally significant property. And with that, I'd like myself and my colleagues, Nick, if you feel like it, to hopefully answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, if anyone needs to go, we went over, feel free to walk out. I'll start row by row. Yes, sir.
I was interested on the left side here. Let me just point to you. This right here, this area right here, what the hell's name was that?
Oh, with the cage?
No, the ground.
The round stone.
The best,
yeah.
I watched this as they were doing it all the time, so I have a lot of questions.
Thank you. We have so many features that it's difficult to talk about all of them. I believe the feature that he is talking about is a semicircular stone feature here in the middle of this formerly asphalt surface parking lot. That's a big puzzler. It is a dry-laid stone alignment in a semicircular shape. It is not a structure or building per se. My best guess is that we think it might be a landscape feature. In the center, on the inside of this semicircular area, it's difficult to see now, there was a large, heavily disturbed area that reminded us of a tree, a large tree, root and trunk stain. And we think that probably when this was turned into a parking lot in the very, very early 20th century, you might have had vehicles coming in from Park Street, and they just put up a semicircular low stone wall, possibly to protect and preserve a tree that was in that location. That's our best guess.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had three things that you exhibited I wondered about. The bayonet, did you get a cross-section on that?
It is triangular in cross-section, and that's
Okay.
weird. Yeah.
And thank you. And then back to this sort of thing, you have that, you call it a residential foundation?
Yes, it would be right over here, behind the building that was torn down, but it's in this area.
And those appear to be brick, is that right? Were the first courses dry laid?
If my memory serves me, Craig, Susan, and Nick, you can confirm this, that they were mortar brick.
They were
It was a
mortar.
mortar brick foundation, and what we actually saw was the eastern half of this residence. I think the western half was underneath this structure and was destroyed in the 1980s when this was constructed.
And then finally, the lead glaze pieces you did had black spots seemed to be in them. And I wondered if that was a decorative thing or a flaw from impurities either in the bisque, the glaze, or just environmentally.
I don't think it was intentionally decorative. I think it's just a side effect of how the different metals in the glaze get distributed.
So that would be probably just that.
Yeah,
that
not
glaze
intentional,
that you
but it's certainly a feature of those lead glaze ceramics.
said. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
you had a graph showing quantity of the different things that were found in the site, and a very small quantity was Native American. Is the
Yeah.
pipe the only thing, or did you find other Native?
So we think the pipe was probably, well, again, we don't know, but we're guessing the pipe is probably African American, but could be Native American. We had also several pieces of less photogenic stone tool debris. So little quartz flakes and that kind of thing. And then also part of what looked like a grinding stone. So yeah, there were 25 artifacts, I think, that we had in that category, mostly stone tool debris.
Thank you.
Did you consider using ground penetrating radar when you were looking for the graves?
Yes and no. One of the things I didn't talk about at great length was this project was compressed in time, the amount of time we had out there. We also, with ground penetrating radar, it can look below the ground, but it can't give you a true and accurate picture of what is there. It can give you a general size, shape, and location of a disturbance in the soil. But in this case, when we were dealing with the potential for graves and the potential for human remains, we wanted to be absolutely certain that we either did or did not identify a grave. And so really, the only foolproof way to do that is to do what we did, use a machine to pull back the topsoil and literally foot by foot visually verify that there are no features cut into that red clay, that red albemarle clay. And that is really the most accurate and most reliable means to make sure that there are no graves. However, it would have been entirely possible to use ground penetrating radar. As I understand it, it can see through asphalt in certain situations and can read down below it. But again, because we were planning to remove the soil anyway, we just decided not to use ground penetrating radar.
Jody, Ben, you indicate that the site is eligible for listing. What is its current integrity? Has most of it's been destroyed?
Most of it is currently destroyed. However, there are many sites on the National Register which were archaeological sites, which had been excavated, and which there are material culture collections. And I think that a part of the site is still there. We believe a large portion of what we think is the Swan Tavern is probably beneath the Redlands building and its adjacent parking lot. Again, that has not yet been investigated, but the material culture collection, the integrity of the features, this was similar to the Foster site that we excavated at the university, where a number of the significant archaeological features were documented and as part of the archaeological record recorded. But we do believe that there are intact features still remaining underneath the extant parking lot. Yes.
Two questions which have been partially covered. The Sanborn map does show the tavern in the southwest corner of that block, which does appear to be where those two buildings are. Do you have an estimate for what percentage of the footprint is actually under those two buildings?
The Sanborn maps were published well after the tavern was demolished in the 18th.
I think you might be referring to the mutual.
Oh, mutual assurance, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's insurance map.
Yeah, we don't have an accurate understanding of precisely where that tavern was. We know it was at the northeast intersection of Park and East Jefferson.
But those features you think are related to the tavern on the backside.
On the backside.
If you go 20 feet.
Right. It's our best guess that perhaps much of the tavern is in the footprint of the Redlands Club, the 1830s residence, more than likely underneath the parking lot adjacent to it, but also extending the northern extensions of the tavern, probably extending into the area that we investigated as well.
Also, ground penetrating radar could have possibly been used to find the bottom of the well. Did you do anything else to try to find the bottom of the well? Would you ever consider core samples or anything?
We did not do anything else. That is a great question. I know the structure that now sits on top of the well was dug down a good 10, 15 feet. So it's entirely possible that much of the well is still below the building.
Actually, no.
You don't think?
No, it wasn't there. So the well actually was quite shallow there.
Okay.
Once they excavated down for the basement of the new courthouse, which was about 15 feet.
15 feet.
There was no evidence of the well continuing any further than that. So unfortunately we weren't on hand to be able to record it as it came out of the ground. But that's another story.
Yeah, Rivanna is being very diplomatic in
Yes.
regards to the amount of time that they were allowed to spend on this site. So the archaeology that they were able to do was pretty amazing considering the time constraints and everything else. And I'll give Sally the last question, and then if you have questions, you can ask.
The soapstone height is interesting, given that there's soapstone quarries in Albemarle. Is it unusual to have soapstone used that way, or is that pretty ordinary throughout the East? And is it likely from Albemarle soapstone, Nelson County area soapstone?
It probably is a local soapstone. I don't think it's that unusual for them to be carved into pipes. It's quite soft stone, so it would be easy to do for an individual with a few spare hours a day to make a pipe or to make several pipes over time. We don't find a lot of them though. They're right.
If you think about a lot of time when people are smoking there and they have access to the pipes that are being shipped over from Europe, and they're being shipped over at such a scale and they're so cheap that they become uncommon because it's more work than it is to go out and buy one of the kaolin pipes, which is one of the other reasons that they sort of get tied in people's minds to the African American community or the Native American communities, because they would have had limited access to those markets. They still had access to those markets, and we know that they're accumulating money and spending their own money. But
so a clay pipe was basically like a tool to put the tobacco in and smoke, and then these were more like personal items. Like these are things that were carried around with them. So the fact that you find them on site like that is cool. Okay, Jeff, I'll give you the last question.
Hopefully, it's a good one. So I'm Jeff Warner, and this has been one of the more fascinating things I've ever been involved in. But someone asked a question about the extension. So if I had all the money in the world, or I could get the city to pay for it, we'd pull up that parking lot at Redlands Club. Ben has been extraordinarily diplomatic, but I just want to share, I don't know, I can make the report available. You can email me at the city. It's not searchable, but we have this report online. So email me at wernerjb@charlottesville.gov, and I can send you the link. Ben is also, and his team also looked at McKee Block for us a year ago. We did do GPR out there. Unfortunately, we found the buildings are still there. They're just under a lot more dirt. And but we're starting to create this image of Charlottesville Day One, we've been calling it, so I have to fight for funds to do it. Archaeology's not that big a deal in Charlottesville for some reason, but the stuff that Rivanna's been doing is just extraordinary. I wish Ben could talk to you all for a whole weekend and stick together all the things that these folks have been involved with, but I just said, if you happen to see a county supervisor or someone on city council, tell them you love archaeology and I'd love some additional money to do neat stuff. I said, if you want to see the reports, contact me and I can share with you the McKee Block report, this report for Swan Tavern, and also the work that Ben did for us out at the park. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all for coming.